On Taiwan, I reiterated the long-standing U.S. One China policy. That policy has not changed. It's guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances. We do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. We continue to expect the peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences.
So that was Secretary of State Antony Blinken reconfirming the US's commitment to the One China policy. Right, let's talk about Antony Blinken's visit to China. Initially scheduled for February 2023, however, that initial visit was cancelled due to the US shooting down of an alleged spy balloon. Up to now, the US have provided no evidence that it was a spy balloon, and according to Chinese authorities, it was simply a weather balloon that had drifted off course and flew over the United States. Ever since that cancelled meeting, the US have been desperate to arrange a meeting between US diplomats and Chinese diplomats. There have been numerous phone calls which Beijing have rejected, and this went on for a number of months until it's rumoured that America sent their head of CIA, William Burns, secretly to China to arrange a framework for a possible meeting between Blinken and Chinese diplomats. I think the main reason for the refusal of the Chinese side to accept meetings from the USA is I think the Chinese side have kind of grown tired of America saying one thing and doing another. And I think this meeting between Blinken and Chinese diplomats is kind of the last chance saloon. It's kind of the last chance America have to carry out actions that align with their words. So on the 18th of June, Antony Blinken arrived in Beijing. He first met with Qin Gang, which was a marathon 7.5 hours meeting. The following day, he met with Wang Yi, who is in overall charge of foreign policy. And then he also had a very short meeting with Xi Jinping himself. It's clear from the Chinese readouts of the meeting that Blinken was told in no uncertain terms what China's position is, and that the US need to abide by the One China policy, which was agreed by President Nixon in 1972, which states that China is one China. Then later in 1979, America agreed that the PRC was the legitimate government of China. It's become more and more obvious that China are now an equal to the USA, and I think the USA really need to accept this position. This is also why Blinken again made the statement that I played at the beginning of this video, acknowledging that the USA abide by the One China policy and that Taiwan is part of China. And he even went further by stating that the US are not trying to push Taiwan towards independence. And in my opinion, this is probably the only reason why he got a meeting with Xi Jinping himself. Although the meeting was only about 30 minutes, and if you take translation into account, then it was probably only a 10 to 15 minute meeting. So it was a very short meeting indeed. However, it's possibly laid the groundwork for a meeting between Xi and Biden in October or November of this year. And it's clear from US media and a number of US politicians that Blinken received quite a lot of pushback on his statement about not supporting Taiwan independence. Many in America think the US and the Biden administration are becoming soft on China for that reason. And my overall opinions from these meetings is that, as I said earlier, China have given the USA a last chance that their actions align with their words. Because in the past, they've continually said they support the One China policy or they back the One China policy. However, their actions have not aligned with those words. And this is seen by the US selling more and more weapons to Taiwan. You know, there's not a few months goes by without we hear in the media of another weapons deal America has made with Taiwan. Now, obviously, that is, filling the pockets of the US military-industrial complex, which is great for the USA. As well as this, America have now stationed troops on the island of Taiwan, and they continuously, provocatively sail their warships and aircraft carriers both in the South China Sea and through the Taiwan Strait. And it's kind of unbelievable how then when China responds to that, retaliates to that, the US media, politicians label China as the aggressive ones. You know, in my mind, the aggressive ones are those people that are sailing their warships around waters that are many, many thousands of kilometers away from them. And the only reason they're doing that is to provoke China. There's no other reason they need to do that but just to provoke China. And in addition to those things, you have people from the American military continually talking about an imminent threat that the People's Liberation Army of China are imminently going to invade the island of Taiwan. And even Taiwanese politicians and media are getting alarmed by this. There's recently been reports that business sentiment is being affected, and it's actually, dissuading businesses from actively investing in Taiwan itself. And furthermore, President Biden himself even suggested that the US would send troops to get involved in any conflict between Taiwan and China. However, that was quickly walked back by the Biden administration. So why is this sudden change of attitude from the USA towards China? What's brought this about? Well, in my opinion, I think this has a lot to do with the war the USA are fighting with Russia using Ukraine as their proxy. Initially, I think the USA thought they would quickly defeat Russia. They imposed economic sanctions, hoping that Russia's economy would collapse. People would get restless in Russia and possibly even overthrow Putin. Well, it's very obvious that that is not what happened. It's also apparent that Russia have been far stronger than the US anticipated. Over the last 12 months, the US have continually escalated the war by sending more modern weapons to Ukraine and more quantity of weapons to Ukraine. Also, their European allies have done the same through NATO. But it's apparent this is still not defeating Russia. And I think the USA are becoming more and more desperate. And even the much hyped recent Ukraine offensive against Russia has obviously failed to achieve the results the US expected. This has resulted in the stock of military hardware and weapons in the USA being depleted. And the US can't accept the humiliation of a defeat against Russia. It's already had the humiliation of a defeat in Afghanistan, so it can't, in its eyes, see another defeat against Russia. And this means it is now sending more and more and more weapons to Ukraine. And this is really depleting the US's stockpiles of weapons. And I would imagine it's eating into the weapons they had earmarked for any conflict that was possibly going to escalate with China. Even before the Ukraine conflict had started, a number of US think tanks had simulated wars between the US and China. And in almost all of those scenarios, the US had lost. So now that their ammunition and weapons are depleted, I think they would find it very difficult to actually win a war if it broke out with China. And I think this is the single reason now that America are trying very hard to de-escalate the situation with China. As Ivor Roberts put it in his article in The Telegraph, Blinken was humiliated during his meetings with politicians from China. And at the meeting, it was agreed that China and the USA would set up a group to communicate on issues. However, China refused to communicate on a military issue, so their militaries will not talk directly to each other. I think the problem here is that America want to pick and choose what they want to collaborate on with China, and China are not prepared to accept the demands from the USA. China now are an equal to America, and America shouldn't think they can talk down to China. That was actually made clear in the meeting in Alaska, I think, and hopefully the USA have heeded those words, but I very much doubt that. And if relations between the US and China were not at a low level, President Biden, a few days after Blinken returned from his meetings in China, trying to smooth things over somewhat, in a speech given to the business community in America, President Biden went on to call Xi Jinping a dictator. I mean, you really can't make this up. So why are China so confident? Well, over the last number of years, through China's Belt and Road Initiative, they have secured supply of energy, food and other raw materials from countries where they do not need to pass through the Malacca Straits. And the Malacca Straits is a stretch of water which in any conflict scenario, the US would move to blockade, thus cutting off vital supplies from China during that time. And as many of you will be aware, Russia is also a country rich in energy, minerals, food, and many other resources. And as you've noticed, over the last few years, China and Russia have made a very, very strong bond, a very, very good friendship. And I believe that China will be able to depend strongly on Russia in the event of any conflict between themselves and the USA. If you examine the facts and history in detail, it's very obvious that the USA have used Ukraine in a proxy war against Russia to weaken Russia. And I feel that the USA want to do exactly the same to China using Taiwan as a proxy. Many of the weapons that have been sent to Ukraine have failed to have a great impact. And it's now clear that the US are having difficulties in supplying the quantities of weapons that Ukraine need. I would imagine the people of Taiwan are watching very closely what is happening in Ukraine, and it will be very interesting to see what happens in the upcoming Taiwanese elections. Well, that's my take on the Blinken visit, including a bit of the situation in Ukraine and how that may affect things for US-China relations. I hope you did like that video. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you do like the channel in general, consider hitting that subscribe button. However, as always, for now, take care.